Right, hello everyone, and welcome to this Centre for Aging and Dementia Research Seminar. My name is Charles Muswhite. I'm the co-lead for the Centre for Aging and Dementia Research, which is a research programme run here at Swansea University. As part of the research programme, we have a seminar series that we normally run at one of the universities that are partners in this research programme, so usually at Swansea, Cardiff, or up at Bangor. During the current situation, of course, we've moved all these online, and I'm really delighted that most of our presenters have been only too happy to adapt and change their presentations so that they can carry on presenting this online. It has the advantages, of course, that we have some attendees from all around the world. I believe there's one attendee here today from Australia, which beat our other furthest person who was just somewhere at the other side of England who's attended previously. So welcome to everyone to this seminar. So we're delighted today to have Monique, Craine and Gareth Noble here to talk to us about aging autistically. If their talk is anything as interesting as the conversation we had when we were practicing and testing this the other day, then I know we're going to be in for a treat. If everybody wants to comment or has a question to ask, please use the chat or the question tab that you'll see on your screen. And then we'll collate them at the end and ask Monique and Gareth the questions after their presentation. Also at the end, we'll send a digital feedback form for people to complete for us to let us know how well it's gone and whether there's any changes we need to make. Other than that, I think I'm delighted to welcome Gareth and Monique. And over to you guys to take the presentation forward. It's lovely to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. As you can see, I'm out in my back garden. That's because I've been evicted from my house because I have 3 kids homeschooling at the minute, and they're taking up most of the space. But I want to thank Charles and Catherine and Rhiannon for inviting us to talk today. We appreciate the opportunity to kind of highlight and promote an issue that is quite important to the autism community, but also in relation to myself and to Monique. And I also want to thank Monique for agreeing to co-present with me as well. So what we're going to talk about today is taking a look at the autistic person as they grow older and highlight some of the issues and some of the comments and concerns that come from the autism community themselves in regards to what it's like preparing and also experiencing an autistic life as an elder. So the purpose of our kind of presentation today is primarily to try and get a conversation going and start a debate and a discussion about some of the important issues that the autism community would like to be addressed to kind of mitigate some of the issues and some of the challenges that the community experiences throughout their lifespan. And I want to start off by quoting Cos Michael. If you're not aware of Cos Michael, she is a fantastic autism campaigner, advocate, and quite importantly, an autistic researcher who has spent a lot of time looking at autism within the context of later life. And she wrote a fantastic little editorial in 2016. And I want to quote from it because it kind of sums up the approach that we're going to be using today to talk about this important topic. Essentially, what Cos is proposing and mooting is the fact that we all expect support and care for ourselves and for our family members in our middle to later years. And autistic people are no different. They want the same. But it's part of the issue that she highlights is it's obvious that there is a distinct limitation to the research evidence that is necessary to both inform and equip those who provide it. And we are going to be quite blunt today, just like what Cos suggests, is that we're going to be trying to present the case of why we're arguing for the case for research into autism and aging. And I would strongly recommend that you go and check out Cos Michael.
Gareth, can I just, Gareth,
Sorry.
Can you hear me? This is
Yeah.
Carol Maddox here. I'm sorry, it appears that none of the, I'm really sorry to interrupt, it looks like that we can't get any of the attendees aren't hearing at the moment. Oh, some can.
Okay.
Ree, can you, sorry, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I just know that from the messages that we're getting, some people can't hear, some are hearing fine.
Hi, Karen, it's Rian. Has the people that can't hear, maybe they need to add headphones, that may help.
If they don't have speakers.
If they don't have speakers, yes, built-in speakers.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, Gareth, because we're getting a mixture of people who can hear and people who can't. So just if we can, so all those who are listening or not listening out there, that's going to be a difficulty. I'll type in a message about what to do. So yeah, if you don't mind pausing for 2 minutes, perhaps.
No problem at all.
Mind you, if we're not talking, they won't be able to tell whether they can hear anything, will they?
No, that's true. That's true.
Sorry, guys, I thought it was going so well this time as well.
That's okay.
That's
These
all right.
technical hiccups happen.
I've also tried to turn up my microphone, so hopefully that might help.
Carol, where are you getting the messages where people can't hear?
They're in the questions, Ree. There's a few people who have, if you actually click on the questions, there's a few people saying they can't hear.
Okay.
But others are hearing fine. So.
All fine, yes. We're on mute how we started.
So perhaps we can try again now. I've sent out a message to everybody saying that can they try with microphones, headphones rather. So really sorry for the interruption.
Oh, thanks, guys.
That's okay. Do you want me to start again? Would that be helpful for everyone?
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Are all systems go?
Yeah, I think we're all systems go now. Thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry if everyone can bear with us a second. That's great. If you can carry on now, that's brilliant.
Cheers, Carol. Hi, everyone. Modern technology. It's always great when it works. So I'll just restart again, just to basically say that the focus of this kind of talk we're going to do today is taking a look at the issues and some of the comments that actually do come from the autism community themselves when it comes to the whole to the concept and idea about growing older. And as I say, I'd like to start by highlighting Cos Michael and the work that she did in her obit or editorial in 2016, which basically highlights that we all have expectations of the level and quality of the care that we are provided to ourselves and to our families in later life. And autistic people are no different. They want the same for themselves and for their family members. So therefore, part of that means that we do have to take quite a closer look at the autistic experience as people grow older, so that we can have an evidence base that can be informed not only just policy, but also service delivery models. And as Cos points out, autistic people can be blunt. So we're going to be quite blunt today as well, and highlighting some of the challenges and trying to highlight and begin this conversation around autistic aging. And I would strongly recommend that you go and visit Cos Michael's webpage and either follow her on social media. Part of these type of talks that I do with regards to autism, I often start with the facts and figures. And I'm conscious of the fact that behind each of those facts and figures, there's a story. There's an individual story that has to be told. And John Adams, who kindly gave us the credit to use his photograph, his artistic work as part of the publicity for this event, also came to the university in 2017 to do a presentation as part of the Festival of Autism that was happening. And he put up this slide. And this is quite a powerful slide, I think, not just in terms of talking about the individual experiences of autistic people, but just in current times. Where he says, I am not the word or the letters, and the spaces in between, or the person your imagination you think I should have been. I am human. And I think it's quite a powerful message, because it does remind us that even when we're doing research and developing up new initiatives to support the autistic community, that we have to remember that the fact that it's an individual journey. So here are some of the numbers just to give some context. From the National Autistic Society, where their facts and figures suggest that there's 704,000 people have a diagnosis of autism. But if when you include their families and carers and support networks, that could equate to 2.8 million people within the UK autism community. And only 11% of carers to autistic people are in full-time work. But that also highlights the economic costs of autism. And there's been some work done out of Galway and London that have looked at the economic costs of autism. But one of the kind of the startling facts and figures from the National Autistic Society is that 70% of autistic people report that they lack appropriate care and support in terms of social care, education and employment and health. So what we've got there is quite a sizable number, quite a sizable portion of the population of the community that do not feel that they're getting the appropriate level of support. And that raises a couple of interesting questions, because is that an access issue? Is it a lack of understanding or awareness or even appreciation of the autistic experience? And when you take a look at some of the other reports that are out there, especially coming from Embracing Complexity, which is a number of organizations coming together to highlight some of these issues, they recently reported that 43% of people with neurodevelopmental conditions say they could not access health services. So we need to actually explore the reasons why that is. And by doing that, we will be able to come up with solutions to address those issues and those challenges. The other one is 1/3 of autistic adults experience mental health difficulties due to the lack of support. And recently, Autistica have highlighted that even further, where they say that 80% of autistic adults experience mental health issues during their lives. That autistic adults without a learning disability are 9 times more likely to die from suicide. And this issue has been explored quite well, actually, by Sarah Cassidy at the University of Nottingham, who's done a number of reports and a number of research studies that was actually co-produced with the autistic community to take a look at some of the issues with regards to that, but also to try and take a look at the solutions in terms of self-care, self-value, and some toolkits that people can actually use to help themselves about social isolation or suicide intentions and everything else in regards to that. Even more statistics now. 85% of autistic people in the UK are unemployed. Now that brings up a number of key issues in terms of aging, in terms of the preparation for later life, but also the fact that that can lead to pension poverty. And when you combine that with this 51% of autistic people have spent time neither in a job nor access to benefits, that can possibly inflate the pension poverty aspects of autistic people as they grow older. Now, I worked with a student of mine this year to take a look at how the autistic community feel about the benefit system in particular, whether or not it had an effect on their physical and mental health. So this data isn't actually published yet, but we're in the process of trying to get it published. and are finishing off the paper for it. But there's a couple of interesting things that really highlight the impact the benefits and being reliant on benefits have for autistic people. So we asked them the simple question, does it? And majority of responders said yes. Then we asked them what type of effect did it have? And again, the majority of responders responded that they had a very negative effect on their physical and mental health. So there's a bit of work there to be done to try and tease out why the system is causing these particular responses from the community. And the last statistic is that only 22% of professionals who support autistic people have received dedicated training about autism and/or skills development. And this is a kind of a key issue in the fact that over recent years, a number of high-profile cases have highlighted the issues with regards to the level of training and awareness in health and social care professionals in order for them to have the appropriate skills to support autistic people in various different settings. And this comes to the fore in another project I did with an undergrad student, which again is unpublished, but we're currently trying to get it published, which is what we did was the Do You Know Me project. And we asked a couple of questions that I think are pertinent to today's talk. The first one is about experiencing situations where autistic persons were stereotyped or judged on the basis of being autistic. And as you can see from this particular column, which is an autistic individual with a formal diagnosis, that they strongly agree that they have had experiences of where they've been stereotyped and judged. Now, we have to unpick that and what it actually means, but in recent years, a number of really high-profile campaigns trying to promote understanding and awareness of autism have been positively viewed by the autistic community based on some of the results from the study. But how is the message getting out and how is the message getting translated? And in regards to the training, again, looking at this first particular column, in terms of improved training on autism to help better support autistic people through the systems, again, majority of responders in this particular group strongly agreed. And then also replicated when we asked them about the social care system. So again, tying this all in to the statistics from the National Autistic Society has also led to some very high profile cases that have reached the media. For example, the Justice for Laughing Boy, the Ella from McGowan case, Bethany's dad, but also just in terms of the media, back home in my own native land of Northern Ireland, we've become highly aware of some of the issues that were being highlighted by the Macklemore Abbey Hospital, as well as the Panorama and Wharton Hall cases. And from these particular cases, in particular in terms of Oliver, that has now led to the UK government making it mandatory for all health and social care professionals to receive autism training. And Paula, his mother, has been very proactive in that and been very engaged with that whole entire process. And these Skills for Health have suddenly have just released their curriculum and their expectations for that training, which is all positive. But again, if we take a look at the wider context, we have the Learning Disabilities Mortality Review, the LEADER program. Again, this is the reporting of fatalities that are reported to the University of Bristol as part of this. And it does highlight some quite startling and quite heartbreaking and emotional stories about, in particular in regards to Do Not Resuscitate, which has also been heavily discussed online within the community in recent times. Because in recent times, we also have to just bear in mind that we are in COVID-19. And I think it'll be appropriate for me to kind of mention something here in regards to the latest statistics that came out from the Care Quality Commission on 2 days ago, which is reporting that there's a 134% increase in the mortality rates reported within the autism community within care settings as a result of being tested positive for COVID-19. So again, this is a number of issues highlighting that there is inequalities in terms of access to services and support for autistic people. But the other thing, just to finish off this particular section of the seminar, is the fact that our language has changed with regards to autism, but also our understanding of autism is changing. And primarily that's due to the fact that we are engaging more with the autistic community to co-produce some research. We have started off with a very medical model, talking about it in terms of the legacy and the history of autism, in regards to even just refrigerator mothers, juvenile schizophrenia, and all that sort of stuff. But now we're moving more and more towards a model, a theoretical underpinning of our understanding of autism in terms of developmental. So autism is now viewed as a neurodevelopmental condition, and it is lifelong. But that language coming from the developmental leads us quite nicely into the other concepts that is quite to the fore at the minute, which is around neurodiversity. And so at this point, I would like to pass over to my friend and colleague, Monique.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I'd like to talk a little bit about the pathway to identification, because one of the issues that's going to be coming up again and again with the aging population is that I'm 50 now. Back when I was at school, I would never have been picked up for an autism assessment, even though I presented quite classically as autistic. So it wasn't something that was looked out for when I was little. It's something that nowadays is picked up more in school grounds on young children. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through how it worked for me, because like I say, I had no idea I was autistic. I had a number of children. I was happily married. But what we had was a child that was behaving differently to the other children and encountering barriers that the other children didn't seem to have. So we sought help. We were lucky that the educational establishment we were in supported us in looking for that help. When our child was put on the autism pathway, that was the first time that word had entered our household. The only thing I knew about autism was Rain Man. So as a typical parent, being told, well, they could have this condition, I went home and I researched it like most parents do. You know, I looked up Google, not that that's a good research tool. And in fact, it's one that can be quite dangerous for autistic people because the links there are just horrendous. But I had to work with the clinical team to be able to diagnose. And the aim was that we get on the assessment pathway, then we get the diagnosis. And what we assumed was that with the diagnosis would come some specific support to help us better understand our child's difficulties. Once they were diagnosed, we were told your child has autism. We were then told about a whole load of things that this could mean. So I think you need to click the next slide, Gareth, because we've reached the autistic person, and here we go. We were told that they were either verbal or non-verbal, that they'd become low or high functioning, that, you know, suddenly now we were looking at parts of his personality through a condition, disorder or syndrome perspective. We were being asked, is that autism with or without intellectual disabilities? Are they mild, moderate or severe? And do they have challenging behavior? Now, this is language that has stemmed from a medical model. Okay, and let me tell you that 90%, if not more, of the autistic community find all the above terminology problematic. Okay, we don't think it's an accurate representation. We think it's biased, and basically it's how other people see us, not how autism actually is. So you know, back in the day when I first came across these terms, like I said, I didn't know anything about autism. I did a search on the internet. I found out some stuff about, you know, it being mainly white boys, age 5, that are diagnosed. I later found out that that's probably because that was the age group and stereotype of child that they actually had the studies on. So that was the only kind of child that they were ready to identify, because they hadn't looked into female presentation of autism. They hadn't looked into how autism is in different ethnicities and stuff. So, you know, we have a tendency through our diagnostic medical model to only find the young white boys who present male. Everyone else seems to slip through the net. But we were left with this language, and the truth is, when you get the diagnosis, there's no follow-up of services. There's no, and now you can access this. It's all just, you know, early intervention is key, and you have to do your research. You have to find out what's available, and you have to be able to be the one to help your child. So that's when the journey really starts. And most parents are left by themselves at that point to work everything out for themselves. Sorry, like I say, they have this negative language about the child's condition, or about themselves if it's an adult that's just been diagnosed. Now, because we were left by ourselves, I thought, well, this isn't any good. I don't want to learn off Google. I don't know what is misinformation, what's peer reviewed, what's actually supported by the autistic community. So I spent a couple of years trying to identify Facebook groups and online forums where I could find access to actual autistic people. A lot of the Facebook groups were made up from adults, but they were parents who wanted to, you know, minimize the effects of autism so that they could get on with their lives a bit better, and, you know, so the kid could fit in. And that never settled well with me, because I was looking for people who had experience and who could tell me what it feels like when you're having a meltdown, what the key signs to spotting a meltdown are, you know, things like that. And eventually I found these groups and I learned a lot from them. But it wasn't just about the language. It was about the way we look at disability and ability altogether. Thank you, Gareth. So we've been looking at it as the medical model of disability, okay? And that, if you can see the little man there, he's got loads of arrows pointing straight at him saying, you are the problem, you are the problem, because it's all about impairments and chronic illness. They often pose as real difficulties, but they're not the main actual problems. So in the medical model, we're looking at disability is caused by an individual's physical, mental, sensory impairments. Okay, it's that simple. It's the individual that is the problem. It's the individual that's at fault. And the focus in medicine, logically, becomes to cure the individual or to alleviate them from the effects. Now, that's the medical model. That suits an awful lot of conditions, an awful lot of illnesses, where the aim is to return the person to their normal functioning so that they can function again. You know, obviously, there are conditions that stop people from being able to achieve, or they start to degenerate. You know, that there are lots of conditions that this kind of language is perfectly appropriate for, but it didn't settle well with the autistic community. And they introduced me to the different model, the social model of disability. Now, if you look at the little man here in the picture, he's got little arrows pointing away from him everywhere. And instead of saying problem, it says barriers, because it's not the person's impairment that causes the disability. It's their inability to access services, to access support, to access society, because of the barriers that are in their way. So if you think about someone in a wheelchair, it's obvious if you don't put a ramp up, they cannot access buildings with stairs. So even though that person does have an impairment that means that they actually need to be in a wheelchair, what's preventing them from accessing society is actually the barriers, not the fact that they're in a wheelchair, because they can still do everything else. You know, they just need to be able to get in and out of buildings safely. So, you know, on the whole disability scale, that works really well. And what they also concentrated on was, because the social model of disability looks at putting the blame not on the individual who has a disability, but on society for the barriers that they create, we kind of redo the language a little, make things a little bit more accurate. So if I could have the next slide, Gareth. Before we had words like verbal and non-verbal. Well, this time we have difference in communication. We had, let me just see where I put it. I have it here, so I don't have to flick back to the other page. Low or high functioning. Okay, that's a misnomer. There is no such thing as low or high functioning. It's not something you can see or put a line in a ruler on a certain place and say, this person's low functioning, this person's high functioning. It's all about support needs. Okay, so we have some people who have high support needs versus people who can mask. Okay, it's not the same as versus people who just have a mild cold. They're still fully autistic. They just have the skill where they can, for short periods of time, pretend to be like everyone else. And they get it wrong because it's not, when we're sensing things, when we're getting stimulus in, we don't perceive it the same way as most people. So even when we're pretending to be like everyone else, it's just so impossible to actually achieve that long term. But that's the distinction that we categorize. You have high support needs, and then you have people who can mask, but all people who are autistic deserve to have supports in place to help them navigate the landscapes. We had the terms condition, disorder, and syndrome crop up over and over and over. Well, that's fine if you're talking to a doctor to talk to them about yourself in terms of disorder. But it's not fine if you want to embrace your neurology, or if you're going to a job interview and you want to talk about how your visual memory works. You don't want to say, because I have a disorder or because I have a condition. You just want to be able to embrace what it is you do. So to me, it's identifying or discovering your own neurodivergent identity. Okay, and don't worry, we'll cover that word later. Before we had, do they have intellectual disabilities? Now, autism is a communication difference, okay? And there's sensory issues that go along with it. But one thing that's very common for most autistics is that we have an awful lot of co-occurring conditions, okay? It's not just that some of us might be learning disabled, okay? Most of us will be dyspraxic or have ADHD or be dyslexic. You know, there's a whole cluster of neurodevelopmental disorders, as they were called, that we refer to as co-occurring conditions, because myself, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic. So, you know, you've got to look at the whole picture, because otherwise you might look at someone who's got autism and you might say, oh my goodness, this is all autism. They're having fits. No, that's epilepsy, seizures. They're non-verbal. That's probably verbal apraxia. That, you know, there's a whole load of different things. They're clumsy. They're knocking into things. They can't write properly. That could just be dyspraxia. You know, so it's getting all those co-occurring conditions and separating them from autism, so that you're actually understanding what the whole individual needs. So then, instead of saying, are they mild, moderate, or severe, a more accurate question would be to say, are their needs being met, or are they unmet needs? Because that will result in someone seeming or presenting more severe if their needs aren't being met, and less severe when their needs are totally met. And then we go on to my favorite of all. I really hate the term challenging behavior because I've always seen it as it's not the behavior that challenges, it's just the person's not qualified to deal with it. So they find it challenging, but that's not what's actually going on. The behavior that you're seeing is brought on by having unmet needs. It's brought on by high levels of distress. Okay, so whenever you talk about someone having challenging behavior, it will challenge the person trying to care for them. But more importantly, it will also be highly devastating to them. So having a meltdown is not a nice thing. It's not something that anyone enjoys having or knows how to cope with when they're having it. Okay, even the adults, we don't cope when we're having a meltdown. It really is the worst thing ever. And, you know, we need support and things. But ultimately, joining the autistic community and having so many adults who had taken years learning how to define why they don't like things and why certain things have a certain effect on them, it really taught me so much. Not just that didn't just help me understand my son better and my other children who were also autistic, but it helped me and my husband realize that we were both autistic too. And so our household is a fully autistic household. But if I could have the next slide. So this is John Hume, and he stated that difference is of the essence of humanity. Difference is an accident of birth, and it should therefore never be the source of hatred or conflict. The answer to difference is to respect it. Therein lies the most fundamental principle of peace, respect for dignity, respect for diversity. Now, he was probably talking about the kind of diversity that we're looking for in the workplace. You know, having more women in the workplace, having more ethnicity, being more supportive and inclusive for LGBT. You know, that kind of diversity has been shown to be a massive boost to employment. But if I could have the next sketch, please, Gareth. What about the diversity that you cannot see? Okay, if you think neurodiversity, made up of two words, neurological and diversity, is the diversity of human brains and minds, the infinite variations in neurocognitive function within our species. Now, that was Nick Walker's definition, and if anyone wants to learn more about neurodiversity, I thoroughly recommend that you check up Nick Walker. The term itself was coined by Judy Singer, but it's moved along since then. And like I say, back in the day, I used to blog for the dyspraxic and dyslexic community because I'd known I was dyslexic since I was in my mid-20s. And so I used to write strategy guides on how to write essays and how to remember your shopping when you go out, how to not fall over so much, and that kind of stuff. And I was constantly blogging for the dyslexic and dyspraxic community. But when I went down this path and discovered, you know, actually we're all autistic as well. Oh, goodness, I never saw that one coming. It was so eye-opening, and I wanted to put things out there to help parents who were new to it, like I had been a few years back, and I started blogging. And if I could have the next slide. This is a quote from my own chapter in the Autistic Community and Neurodiversity Movement book that's just been released. Because understanding the terms neurodiversity and neurodivergent myself was only half the battle. Okay, I still had the problem that I wrote in person first language, person with autism, and I still used medical language to describe our differences in terms of deficits and impairments. Now, the thing is, when you're doing this, when you're using medicalized language to define someone, it's really hard to actually speak to the community who don't tend to use that language. So if you think we don't use the high and low functioning labels because we find them completely well, harmful, actually, because if you're low functioning, you're robbed of all aspiration. And if you're classed as high functioning, you're robbed of all support. So they're actually detrimental to us. There's so many different things that are out there that people You know, I've done the searches on the internet. I know what you find when you're looking at autism, and it's not very positive. And when you try to write not positively, okay, because I don't think of autism as a gift. I also don't think of it as a hindrance. It's just what it is. It's the way I am. It's the way I work. It's the way I always have been. It's the way I interpret the world around me. It's the way I feel, the way I see. So for me, I don't want to describe those aspects of myself in negative medical terms. I want to be able to have a much more positive vocabulary, not because I think it's a positive, because like I say, I think it just is, you know, just like I don't think it's a negative to be neurotypical. I don't think there's many people that actually fit the bill of pure, you know, neurotypical, but society is built assuming everyone's neurotypical. So schools, you know, you have to fit the right, hammer those circles into the squares. You have to come out like sheep. Everyone's expected to be the same to achieve the same. Well, we're not. We're all very different. But those of us who get diagnosed with autism or autism spectrum disorder or even dyspraxia, you know, neurodivergent people, we're divergent because we're significantly different in the way we function. So basically, I've gone to the community that I've been part of for quite a few years now, and believe me, it's not easy being a member of the community because we're all so different. So what I'd like to point out here is I'm not talking about my own autism here. I'm not talking about my children's or my husband's. I'm talking about the feedback I've had from hundreds of autistic adults and parents of autistic children about what they fear, really, and what they want and the reality of their healthcare. Because as a group, we're more than aware that we're 9 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population. We're more than aware that our average life expectancy is between 54 and 56. You know, I said before I'm 50. Well, I'm quite old aged for an autistic person. Okay, we're very aware of the issues out there. So is it any surprise that the top one I've got there is mental health? Because the reality is our mental health gets a beating from the day we are born. We try to explain with no language because we're too little, and most of us tend to take a while to develop the language. But we try to explain that things are too bright. We get told, don't be silly, everyone else is fine with it. Well, for us, it's like being in a 100-watt light bulb and we're just getting told it's not real. It is real for us. We go to school and we can see that people can do things that we can't, and we get frustrated. Why can't I do that? They do it so easily. They never forget their homework after spending 6 hours doing it. I do all the time. So there's a lot of things that we end up getting angry at ourselves over, especially if we're undiagnosed and don't even realize we're autistic. So if you think back to the days when I thought I was dyslexic and I had other problems, barriers and issues and things I couldn't do, I had self-hatred. I thought there was something fundamentally wrong with me. I couldn't function like other people, and I really disliked myself. Now, for me, realizing that actually I'm autistic and becoming part of a community where I realize that I'm the norm and not the exception has taken away all those self-hatred and negative things, because I'm lucky. I'm in a relationship, a stable relationship. I have children. You know, to me, I think I've achieved quite well, but I'm not the average autistic. Okay, there are plenty of people out there like me, but when I went to the community, what I heard was that most people are not satisfied with their level of support for their mental health. Okay, they do not feel supported because they feel they have no one to go to who speaks their language. Okay, now I don't know if Gareth has linked this or not. I'm sure we can find it later, but Damien Milton has done research called the double empathy. problem. And what he's found, and there's been other researchers that have looked into this now as well, what they've found is that autism communication disorder isn't really a disorder in the sense that the only people we can't communicate with are neurotypical people. When we're communicating amongst autistics, those barriers are all gone. We understand our own communication type. We don't get scared that someone's going to, have a meltdown or something, because we see it coming, and we're predicting things better than most can. So for us, it's it's we just don't have anyone that speaks our language. And when you go and see a counsellor or a therapist or a medical professional, and you start to display any autistic tapping or rocking or moving your hands too much, sometimes they get upset and they want us to stop because they think we're reacting aggressively, and it couldn't be further from the truth. It couldn't be further from the truth. And the thing is, because this has happened to us many times, and again, I'm talking about the community here, the wider community, not just myself, you start to build up anxieties. Now, in therapy, we're taught that generalized anxiety is someone who has an unnatural fear of the unknown. Okay. What I'd like to point out that autistic anxiety, people can still have generalized anxiety as well. It's a medical thing. They can go down that path. But with most autistics, we're not afraid of the unknown. We don't have anxiety because we're scared to go out and interact with people. We have lived experience. Okay, we have lived experience that shows that we are always the ones that get accused of things. We're always the ones that are told our perception isn't right because everyone else sees it differently. We have our autonomy removed from us, and we're scared to interact with people who hold power over us. So there's a lot of autistic people that are terrified, absolutely terrified of interacting with police. Okay, because they might want to touch us. We don't want to be touched. We react differently to things, and we put neurotypical people on edge. But the funny thing is, we don't put each other on edge. We speak our own language, and what we need is for other people to start speaking our language too, so they're not misinterpreting the signals we get off. We also have to tackle the hostile environment. Okay, for neurotypical people, I think life is, generally speaking, it might be a bit too wet or a bit too hot, but it's bearable. For many autistic people, the environment is really, really hostile. We live in big built-up areas with noisy apartments, with noisy houses, with all kinds of, you walk into a room and there's a telly going, there's a computer going, there's stimulation everywhere. And for us, if we're sat in a room, and again, I'm talking generally about the community, there may be a few autistic people who don't have this, they're still autistic, but generally speaking, the majority of the community are telling me that sitting in a cafe means they can't follow a conversation because of the background noise. Okay, so you go to a Costa, you've got the coffee machines going. We cannot hear the person sat right in front of us. We start lip reading because we can't make out their voice any over the hum and the noise that's coming from around us. So the environment is built up in a way that suits neurotypical people, not autistic people. It's hostile to us. And then accessing services. The first thing that came up when I asked people what they would like moving forward when it comes to health services, they said to not have to do the telephone triage, to be able to find different ways to see the doctors. Now, some people prefer the face-to-face. Okay, some autistic people prefer the face-to-face. I guess they're reading body language, they're more comfortable. Other autistic people prefer like this, to Zoom the doctor or something. But again, some autistic people won't be able to do that. And then there's others who, you know, they can't even make it through the triage on the phone. But then there's some who would prefer telephone consultations. The point is, unless the GPs are asking us, what's your preferred method of communication? And how do we ensure that you're getting the service you need? We have a communication difficulty that means we can't even tell them. And if we try to tell them, we fear that we'll be acting in a way that they might think is a bit weird. And, you know, we just don't make a fuss. As we get older, we get even more settled in our ways. But being autistic, you know, I didn't know when I was young. Makes no difference, really. I was still autistic. And I now understand why my behaviors were the way they were. But they haven't all gone. Some have. But for some autistic people, the behaviors become worse because remember what I said before? It's not about challenging behavior. It's about discomfort. It's about distress. Okay. So for me, I was lucky because I had a mum who cooked menus that I liked. And I mean, she did it Monday. This is, you know, we have this on Tuesdays. We have that. It was regular. It was food I was used to. And even to this day, I try to go back to that menu that she used to do because it's, I don't like anything new. I don't like textures. I don't like strange spices. So I'm really, really difficult to feed, but nothing compared to some. And when my child was young, I remember thinking he will only eat cold sausages and cold beans. He didn't even want anything warm going in his mouth. And I used to think, my God, that's such a bad diet. I've got to do something to fix this. Ultimately, we develop more tastes as we get older. I think I've got quite an okay palate now. We have quite a nice balanced diet in our family. But there are families out there who are still struggling to feed their young adults, now they're young adult, autistic adults, with any variation. They'll only eat bread, they'll only eat yellow food, or they'll only eat red food. You know, it's not just about picky eating, okay? We're not just picky eaters. If I eat something that hurts me, it physically hurts me to eat it. I feel pain. So as a result, we tend to have pretty poor diets. I think pretty much across the board. Many of us have gut issues as well, you know, probably because of the bad diet. We also, as we go through life being discriminated against on a daily basis, being denied opportunity, a lot of us seem to turn to substance misuse. Now, I question the word misuse because what people report to me is not that they're turning to substance misuse, they're turning to something that they want to medicate themselves. Okay, it's a different thing. They are, and it's because of their anxiety and their stress, and they're just not being able to cope. So some people turn to alcohol, some people will turn to cannabis. I mean, this is across the board with neurotypical people too. But what I've found is it's less recreational amongst our group and more because they really need to chill out. Or to disconnect. So we end up with substance misuse issues from people that have been trying to help themselves rather than people that have been trying to, you know, play long and you know, party hard. So obviously we end up in having problems further down the line because of those kind of things. And we don't seek medical assistance. Now that sometimes is because of the barriers I've already mentioned, but sometimes it's also because we don't feel pain the same way as other people. Some of us have a very low pain threshold. Some of us have an exceedingly high pain threshold. So, and most of us find it hard to explain what's going on in our bodies when there is pain. So we find it hard to communicate the issues we have. We find it hard to make the appointments to see the doctors in the first place. And we have a lifetime where quite a few of us have you know, done things that have not been beneficial for our bodies. We've not looked after them like temples, quite the opposite. You know, we have drained them. But ultimately, these are the main issues we're encountering. And as people get older, you know, that it compounds them. So I don't know whether you wanted to come back in, Gareth, because you were saying you wanted to talk about social isolation, loneliness, and pension poverty. I think you've covered those in your previous slides, but I'd just like to, you know, say that the majority of autistic people, as they're older, become more and more socially isolated and more into their little bubbles and lack support to come out of the bubbles. So a lot of autistic people report loneliness. And as Gareth said, when 80% of us or 85% of us can't get work during our whole lives, okay, that's a snapshot that says 85% of autistics. I have been associating with autistic groups for 5 years now, and the majority of us are long-term unemployed, have never been able to actually keep down a job and do the 9 to 5 like others. So, you know, pension poverty is looking at me right in the face, and I know I'm not alone because we have no way of improving our lifetimes. So would you like to take that away there, Gareth?
Cheers, Monique. Yeah, so just building on some of the stories and the experiences that Monique had talked about there. We're getting to the stage about where, do you know about autism? Are you aware about autism? But how does that equate to understanding what autism is and how the impact that has across the entire lifespan? And as I say, we used the work from John Adams as part of the promotional material for this, because of his work is called An Empty Chair, of a life unfulfilled. And therefore we need to prevent that by looking at what we need to support them across the entire lifespan, but particularly in regards to old age, because of the legacy issues that Monique was highlighting. So in terms of where we're at in terms of a research context in autism aging, quite recently a paper was produced that looked at, it was a literature review paper that looked at autism in later life, and you can find it there. But it starts off from the premise that, as Monique was talking about in terms of her life journey, and highlighting some of the issues that were coming back from the autistic community, there is a sense of a lost generation where of autistic adults who have never been identified or diagnosed until later in life. Because a lot of the autism work and some of the assessments and outcome measures that are actually used as part of that pathway are very much geared towards children and young people. You know, I had the privilege a few years ago of helping an 89-year-old woman getting an autism diagnosis. So she had 89 years of her life of being autistic and not being able to get a diagnosis during that particular time. So there's a lost generation that's of autistic adults now who are going to be going into their older age and their later life. But we also have to prepare for the fact that, you know, there's a generation behind that as well. But one of the a couple of key findings that came from this review paper is that says there's limited research on the health and mental issues on older autistic adults. Again, highlighting some of the points that Monique's experience and journey has highlighted. We need to do more in this particular area. So in terms of accessibility to healthcare, there was no studies that had participants that they included in the review that had over the age of 64. And they make the conclusion that there's really a very distinct lack of research that actually takes a look at the issues and the specific aspects of an older autistic person's life experience. They concluded that there was no studies that looked at employment. Again, employment and creating a financial base and financial security is one of the key components to addressing pension poverty. So if we have 85% of adults, autistic adults, who are not in employment, are not getting equality and opportunity for education to gain employment, and we're not actually looking at that area, how are we actually going to address the issue of pension poverty? There were no studies in terms of transportation. Social isolation is a key aspect of the autistic experience. As a parent of an autistic child myself, my majority of my social life is online, because of the difficulties we have in trying to provide an appropriate level of care for my autistic son, to allow us to go out on, me and my partner go out on dates or have any form of social life. Again, most of our social connections is online. But a key part of social inclusion is being able to get to places. And just as Monique was talking about the kind of the sensory issues and environmental issues, being on a bus is very noisy. There's a lot of stimulus.
And smelly.
And of course, and smelly. So there's a lot of environmental social stimulus that anyone has to actually try and process and deal with. But in terms of neurodiversity, we might, autistic people may actually internalize that, and that can actually lead to issues further on down later that day. So we do need to take a look at the issues of transportation. That in terms of social connectedness and social satisfaction, they conclude also that it's yet to be explored. But that's a key thing in terms of, social isolation and the experience of autistic loneliness. We need to take a look at how we can kind of engage more to support a level of social interaction and socialization. Again, highlighting some of the work that Damien Milton has talked about in terms of autistic people having the communication skills to talk to other autistic people. But the main finding is that there is a lack of research in regards to the autistic person's experience of aging in later life, and that we have to essentially come to the conclusion that whilst life has no limitations except the ones you make, it also means that we are limiting the expectations of life for autistic adults as they grow older. So we need to take a look at this issue. We need to explore this issue. We need to identify the problems, the challenges, and actually then work collectively, collaboratively with the community to try and come up with solutions to those particular issues. So why isn't there a lack of research? Why is in terms of aging and autistic community? Well, essentially, it's all got about to do with money and the priority of funders. And the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee in 2016, which is an American-based, took a look at the global spend in terms of research funding in regards to autism across Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, and United States. And the key thing that this particular slide highlights is that if we take a look at lifespan issues, in terms of the UK, 9% of all funding on autism was actually towards projects that explored lifespan issues in terms of the autistic community, whilst the majority of it, 64%, was on the biology and the biomedical aspects, which is quite startling. But we also have to, take a look at the fact that there's a lot of limitations. Limitation in terms of collaborative partnerships across, research disciplines, lack of opportunities for creativity and innovation beyond the lack of funding onto it. But essentially, it all boils down to opportunities. And again, part of the reason why we want to do this seminar with you today was again to pose the question in terms of, there's research going on in social isolation, loneliness, access to health across the lifespan, but particularly in regards to aging. Well, what can you do to adapt what you've done to create opportunities to us to explore the autistic experience of older life? So what are we wanting to do? Well, essentially, as a community, what we're wanting to do is get people to look at the autistic environment, not just in terms of education and employment, but also in terms of social inclusion, and promote that concept of respect for neurodiversity. The other aspect of it is just taking a look at various different things, all the way up until the accessibility and addressing the health and well-being of the autistic older person, or autistic people in general, but also to do that in a meaningful way, by having proactive engagement and co-production with the autistic community to help identify the solutions to these particular challenges. So what can you do? Simply get involved. By working together, by sharing our ideas, by sharing our experiences, by sharing our evidence and our research and service delivery models, we can get to a point where we're building an integrated and multidisciplinary strategy that takes a look at creating this supportive evidence to inform policy, but also to inform how services can be flexible and adaptive to meet the needs that are being expressed by autistic people. That we can engage quite meaningfully with the autistic community to create those opportunities, to do it in partnership, to be inclusive and to be respectful. And by doing that, we will actually be able to promote innovation. We will be able to share best practice. We'll be able to identify the components of best practice and get that message out to everyone who's involved in the delivery of care and support for the autistic people. So essentially, what we're talking about is aligned to the objectives and the work that the centre is actually doing. You know, we want to be able to build capacity. We want to be able to acknowledge the issues from the autistic community and acknowledge that we generate new knowledge to be able to address those. So there's key messages we wanted to get across today. The first one being, as as Monique was explaining about her experience throughout her entire life, is that there's a legacy of issues that need to be addressed, identified, and recognized. We have to take a look at the aspects and the components that lead to that health and social and well-being inequalities. We can do that if we actually have a more expansive research base and being able also to capture the experiences and the stories of autistic people as they've gone through life and listen to the community. So we do that by being engaging, by doing co-production. We do that in terms of respecting the diversity and value the older autistic person's voice. But that also leads us to the final point, the final questions. What are the priorities of research? Well, essentially, we've talked about social isolation, mental health, employment, education, opportunities, accessibility to health and social care, service delivery policy and evidence-informed policies. So what are the priorities of research? Well, essentially what I'm suggesting is the priorities for research is everything. We are missing out on an opportunity here to actually come up with a proactive strategy to address and support the autistic community as they grow older. So thank you very much for watching and for joining us in this little discussion today, and we're more than happy, me and Monique, to answer any of your questions.
Indeed.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, both of you. Can you hear me, Gareth and Monique?
Yes, we can.
Hi.
Right. Oh, sorry. Just beating Charles to it. I was just going to read out a question that we've had from Donna, who studied with you previously, Gareth. She's a learning.
Hi, Donna.
So she's a first-year learning disability nurse, and she studied ASD with Gareth previously at Swansea University. And she says, I feel that there's a need for a specialist ASD/learning disability nurse, and wondered what Gareth and Monique feel about this. She feels that there's a big crossover with learning disabilities and ASD, and a specialist role such as the above could have a big impact. So I'll invite you to answer that question then. Thanks.
Hi, Donna. Thanks for the question. It's a good question. Essentially, I think we do need to take a look at all options when it comes to key roles, key professional roles, to ensure that there's a skill development approach. And one of the approaches for that I know I've talked about for years is the fact that there may be a need for autistic specialist practitioners. And part of that could be to help bridge between the various different areas of service delivery, whether it be from terms of mental health services through to learning disability support services, having key specialist practitioners in autism in hospitals, for example, to help with the transition in, to help with admissions, to help coordinate the care. And part of that, role currently in hospitals is through learning disability nursing. But again, we also have to recognise that there is a portion of the autistic community who do not have a learning disability that will still need that level of support and encouragement and navigation through health and social care systems to make sure that they get their needs met. So yeah, I'm certainly excited about the creative idea about having autistic specialist practitioners that can bridge between various different disciplines. Monique, do you have anything to add?
I do, because I think that's a corking idea, frankly. Basically, I mean, one thing you brought up earlier, Gareth, was the Oliver McGowan, the mandatory training that's coming in because of what happened. And what I'd like to point out is I've been doing some research into it, and it's only coming in England. It's not coming in Wales or Scotland. So we have some campaigning to do over here in Wales to try and get any kind of training coming in as standard. From where I stand, it's not just the learning disabled or autistic specialists. It would help if we had people who could speak our language at all levels. So when you go in, there has to be someone behind the desk at reception that can tell the difference between someone who's becoming aggressive and someone who's obviously autistic and displaying stimming behaviors and stuff. So from cleaners, from receptionists, I want it across the board. I want everyone in establishments to have some kind of training so they can communicate better with us. I mean, we're from little, if you're diagnosed with autism, you're told that this is how to account for neurotypical people. This is how to adapt, how to change. I'd like the lessons to go the other way for a little while and for people to learn about us. But when it comes to nursing, to doctors, it's absolutely crucial that we have people who understand us. Okay, and the problem when you don't have people who are trained in learning disability, in autism, even in dementia, if you're not trained to realize what is going on, you misinterpret what you're seeing. And you can conclude that someone's being belligerent, someone's being difficult, when in fact they're confused and not understanding. Yeah. So it's crucial at all levels. I think that there is a difference between autism and learning disability. When people say them together, the kind of implication that this will help people who are learning disabled and autistic, and very few people fit that specific category. You get a lot of people who are learning disabled, you get a lot of people who are autistic, but in the Venn diagram, the crossover isn't actually that huge, and you're left with the learning disabled people on the outside that aren't autistic and the autistic people on the outside that aren't learning disabled. So you actually need to work with both communities. You need involvement from learning disabled people, you need involvement from autistic people so that they can teach the experts how to communicate throughout their teams. But I think that we do need nurses. Yes, we do. Thank you.
Yes, and also in terms of the training, mandatory training being applied to England, there is the digital curriculum framework for autism training that has been produced by the Welsh Government that has various different levels onto it, and that's currently being rolled out as part of the Welsh autism strategy. Thanks, Monique.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, Monique, Gareth, thank you for your presentation there. It's Charles here again. I've got some on the question panel for you. I'll go through a few of them here. The first one, Monique, is quite a personal one for you, from Heidi Rees. Why is it, do you think, that you were misdiagnosed as being autistic till later on in life? Do you think that has something to do with perhaps presenting as being too stereotypically able or normal, or do you think it's due to other factors such as even, you know, things like being female, for example?
Okay, Heidi, what a great question.
Very good question,
And not a
Heidi.
short one, not a short one to answer. I guess there's a whole load of reasons. Okay, because to start off with, at the age of 5, I presented like your typical white male autistic child. I had the language delay, I needed speech and language therapy, I had problems with coordination, I was classed as a slow learner, or as one teacher told me, retarded. You know, so my early education, I was a very classic presentation of an autistic kid. And they missed that completely because I came from a bilingual family. And back in those days, because I spoke another language at home, everything was put down to, oh well, because they've confused her with 2 languages, you know. So my parents ended up dropping the second language at home and just speaking to me in English because the teachers were telling them that was confusing me. I was not even picked up on for dyslexia back then. Okay, I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 28 and at university, when it was so obvious I was dyslexic. So I think a lot of the issues comes to teachers' understanding. Okay, because when we looked at the graph with the cogs, it's crucial that you have support. It's not just a parent coming in and saying, my kid has difficulties. The first thing you'll be told is, well, all kids have difficulty with something or other. Don't worry about it. But then you get sent to specialists. And like I say, I saw so many specialists, and yet no one clicked on it could be autism, it could be dyslexia, because I came from a family who spoke a different language at home, and we were poor. So it just didn't seem to be something. In fact, one of the teachers at the school, when I was 14, I said, I think I've heard about this thing called dyslexia. Is it possible that I'm dyslexic? And they said, my dear, dyslexia is an excuse for middle-class thick children, and I won't tolerate it here. So, you know, that goes back to the old attitudes, which I'm glad to say aren't there anymore. But a
Yeah,
crucial
that
thing.
sorry,
Sorry,
Monique,
Gareth.
that's the legacy
Yeah,
people have to
but
understand in terms of, you know, when we have autistic adults going into their older age, there is all this legacy, and I'm quite interested recently to start reading about the the trauma informed approach that has
yes.
been used to take a look at various different aspects. And I think part of the way forward with dealing with the legacy is to look at it in terms of a trauma informed approach, because
But there's
yeah.
also, sorry, Gareth, there's also the fact that, because like I say, it's very much down to the system I grew up in and the
Hmm.
educational format that was there at the time. But another factor that a lot of people don't consider is that, looking at the dyslexia, for example, okay, I hid that. I would spend 2 hours doing homework that I would take in and say it only took me 10 minutes, because if I said I rushed it, they wouldn't give me so much grief about the bad writing, the bad handwriting, the bad spelling. I used to, you know, from age 5, I'd be looking at what my peers were doing on the table beside me and thinking, I can't write like that. I don't know how to spell like them. And I'd hide all these things. And the one difference between me and a lot of autistics, I guess, is that I loved acting. I loved acting. And, you know, even at school, I used to pretend to be an ape, and I'd sit there picking fleas off people and stuff. And I really loved it. And the teachers found it so cute. So they'd take me around the playground like an ape, you know, walking along, just because I loved mimicking people. And I think it's my ability to mimic people that meant that, between hiding my deficits, hiding the things that I struggled with, um, mimicking other people and pretending I was just like them when that was furthest from the truth, they all played huge factors as well. Because what you have to remember is we live in a society where people want their children to be normal. They want them to have a normal attainment. They want them to access education like everyone else. They want them to be able to go out and make friends like everyone else. And it's natural to want that for your kids. When you know you're different from a very young age, when you can see, I mean, I used to think I was like an alien, that I'd accidentally landed in this world with these weird people who I really didn't get. But because I had the ability to act, I would, and I still do it to this day, I refer to the clothes I wear for work as my costume, you know, because you have to put on a persona to be able to do things that people accept. And that's probably why I wasn't diagnosed, Heidi, when it comes down to it, because not only was the system set up to not identify people like me, but I did the typical childhood thing of trying to cover up all the areas that I thought people might notice me being weird in.
I think that's
So
fascinating.
we've got to look out.
Yeah, fascinating answer. And I guess that fits quite a number of different walks of life for people who desperately trying to appear normal in certain situations. And again, as people age, just the same kind of thing. You're supposed to act your age or act as you should do, and things like that. Next question is an interesting one, because we discussed this a little bit the other day on the test call. From Rosie, says, I'd be interested to know what Monique and Gareth think of the A Word TV series. Do you think it's a positive portrayal of autism? Do you think it's helpful in increasing people's awareness of and attitudes to autism and disability in general?
Gareth, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah. Essentially, I think it's a positive thing that there is more mainstream creative programs and outlets that look at autism. I must admit, I haven't actually watched the A Word, but from the clips and stuff that I've actually seen, I think it's important to remember that these portrayals on media are one person's journey, and everybody's journey is completely different. So, for example, some of the things that have been portrayed in the A Word, I can't relate to, because my experience as a parent of an autistic young person is completely different. But then some parts of it resonate, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that autism, in terms of mainstream media, is being portrayed, and it's, you know, shining a light. That can only be a good thing. But then there's the downside of some of the portrayals of autism in the media, where it can be very much geared towards deficit, impairment. I say one of the things that we wanted to do in recent years, especially as part of the Festival of Autism that happened in 2017, was to celebrate autism, was to show appreciation for the autistic person and autistic community. So it's a mixture of everything, but essentially having stuff like the A Word again opens up conversations around the dinner table, and that's always a good thing. Monique?
I have a slightly different view, Rosie. I guess whenever there's a program on autism, because I'm an autism advocate or an autistic advocate, I have groups of people contacting me straight away as soon as something's aired saying, what did you think of it? So when new things come out on autism, I end up kind of recording them on my telly so that I can watch them, and just so I can answer these questions. I had a lot of hope for the A Word. I think the actors in it are absolutely fantastic. I think that a lot of thought and effort has gone into making it, but it's telling the story from the parent's perspective. And it's telling the story from a neurotypical parent's perspective. So for myself, I ended up stopping watching it because I was finding it quite upsetting. Because, like I said earlier, I live in this autistic bubble where every single member of my family is autistic, and we all kind of get each other. And when someone walks off, we kind of understand what they're doing. And yet along came this show where the focus was on the parents and how traumatic, because, oh my God, the kid's not normal. Look, he's kicking off, he's hitting them. What on earth is going on? How can they cope? And the focus was all on them. And I guess for the first time, I got to see how horribly people view us within society. So although for many people they said, oh, it really resonates, the looks we get when we go shopping with the child, for me, it was just a big eye opener for how much some people just don't like us and our behaviors. And so I ended up not watching it any further. But I agree with Gareth, we need a lot of representations of autism, because even though there are aspects of the child, the boy, that resonated with me, he's still just one autistic person. And I guess it's like if I was saying, okay, there's a group of aliens coming, okay, just if we can just imagine that for a second, these aliens are coming to Earth and they want to see what a man and woman look like, okay, and what they're actually like. It would take such a lot of work to find a man or a woman that are representative of the whole of humanity. And yet when we're talking about autism, that's exactly what people want. They want autism to be a representative of the whole autistic experience, and you're never going to get that in one character. You can't,
No.
because you have some people who are hyposensitive to things, whereas others are hypersensitive to things. We're all so very different that every single character on the screen will give you some insight into some aspects, but it's not going to give you the whole picture. So like I say, the A word was very much aimed for parents who come across this new diagnosis and this new pathway and are exploring it.
But I
Not
think
so good for autistic people.
But I think, some credit has to give to the team that made the A word, because of the level of engagement they had with certainly parents and of autistic children and young people, and also the fact that they, recruit autistic people as autistic actors to portray some of the roles. Again, there's a lot of positives that come from that.
That's it.
Approach in terms of the A word, and it is a massive step forward in terms of getting people to talk about autism.
Absolutely.
So yeah, but unfortunately, I've never seen it.
I have, and like I say, the acting in it was brilliant. I cannot fault the actors. They certain, and I can imagine it is quite plausible that that's what many families would have gone through. But I think the first episode they managed to go from suspecting to having a diagnosis within a week. The reality is it's more like 3 to 6 years. But that's TV drama for you. But like I say, the acting was indeed, the acting was very good. It hit the nail on the head in a lot of areas for parents. Autistic people struggled a bit more to see its relevance to them.
Thank you.
But ultimately, like I say, we need more and more. So I hope that answers your question, Rosie.
Great.
Good question,
Right.
Rosie.
We've had two questions from two different Karens, and I'm going to put them together a little bit because they're similar. So Karen Shearsmith says, why do you think it's so hard for services to adapt how they do things to meet the lived experience of individuals? I mean, that's not just autism, is it? That's in lots of worlds, but particularly for this autism sort of pathway. Many services have pathways in place for service access and use, but requires the individual to fit into the pathway rather than the individual rather than the other way round, I guess. And from Karen Shepherd, there's a greater need for even the medical profession to change the way they view autism. So stereotypical is still viewed as the norm. Parents are left to challenge the authorities and to get the rights for the young people to support the need rather than medical professionals always understanding it. So earlier diagnosis is helpful, but there's a void in supporting young and older generation. And it sort of falls on informal carers, or it falls on families, or it falls on friends to sort of try and help themselves out of it rather than the official services being able to do it. I guess it's patchy as well. In different places can be better than others. Any comments on those?
Those are very good questions, because it highlights a number of different issues and a number of different challenges. So in terms of Karen's the first question, yes, it's a difficult to answer because there's so many factors to it. But I've been asked this question before, and the response I usually give is, it's just for people who are providing services, it's okay to start a conversation by asking, what do you need? You know, is it, you know, do you need this this information in this format, or what can I, you know, what can I do to help communication? But also then just taking a look at even the pathways and the processes that are involved in service delivery, and asking the question, you know, how adaptable is this for someone who has communication support needs? How is this adaptable in terms of people asking for access to mental health? So yeah, it's asking a complex question, but in a very simple way. What do you need? To that one. In terms of the second question about stereotypical approaches, I completely agree. You know, as I say, the sense of community and support I've had personally has been the greatest, actually coming from the autistic community themselves, and parents. And you know, there's some fantastic local organizations that do a number of different things to try and create that type of self-support. But I can't, if I was to go into every single battle I've had to have, or we've had to have as a family in regards to my autistic son, I'd be here for about 4 or 5 days, constantly talking. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
It's the part of the problem is, as a parent of an autistic young person, and someone who you know, works in this area, teaches in this area, tries to do research in this area, I still have difficulty in choosing which battle is the right one to have. And it can be quite draining, emotionally, physically, everything, trying to have those battles. And again, that level of being able to talk to fellow members of the autism community, other parents and other autistic people and autistic adults, you do get that sense that everybody has the same battle. So something needs to change, and quite dramatically changed. And part of that is that stereotypical view of what autism is. As I say, I started this talk by using John Adams' I Am Human, because it really does emphasize the fact that autistic people are people. They have the same wants, needs, and expectations as everybody else. They may be different, but everybody's wants, expectations, and needs are different. And we just have to have a level of respect for that. So yeah, part of the issue is we have to break down the stereotypical barriers, and by doing that, using like, you know, doing things collaboratively, partnership way, will certainly help break down some of those stereotypes. Monique, do you have anything to add?
I certainly do. I certainly do. When it comes to service provision, it's one thing I hear a lot is that the very moment people get their diagnosis of autism is the very moment the next words out of the diagnostician's mouth is, unfortunately, you don't qualify for any services here and we aren't trained to help you. So I know an awful lot of autistic people who went through the assessment pathway, got diagnosed, only to be told, we now can't help you at all because you no longer fit the mental health remit because it's autism, but they don't get the actual support put in place. Then there's a lot of people who tell me that they've gone to organizations for support, but the support isn't what they need. So for example, if they're also learning disabled, there might be a hub that they can attend, but if they don't have an additional learning disability, then there's nothing for them. when they do go looking for support, the first thing that often happens is their autonomy is kind of taken away, and they're told what they should be wanting rather than actually getting support for what they want. So a classic example is when you go to the to autism services and say, look, what I really need help with is I never get out the house, I never see people, I don't interact with anyone, and my paperwork is driving me mad because I don't know how to do the forms. What you actually need is someone that can come in, sit down and help you with the forms. But what most places will do is say, well, we can help you go to the hairdressers, you know, and access society. It seems to be their priorities rather than our priorities. So again, when you're looking to cater for all of humanity, because autism is that varied, okay, it covers the whole human spectrum. How can you designate services for a stereotype? This comes to the second point as well. You know, if you do look at the stereotype, then the only services that are going to be around are for people with an awful lot of co-occurring conditions. They won't be autism specific because, you know, it's the other conditions that need the medical treatment and stuff. We need, and I said this before, for all medical professionals to have better training to communicate with us, to understand our language and to understand where our needs differ. They need to know if we're the kind of people that we don't even feel when we need to go to the toilet. We have very little sensation inside the body. We can't tell when we're hungry. We can't tell when we need a wee. You know, we can't tell when we're in pain. The amount of times I go to bed, and it's like a joke in our family, to present the war wounds to see if anyone can remember how they even happened. You know, so when you're that way inclined, when you're that incapable of telling what's going on in your own body, that's when we need the medical professionals to be better trained to understand us so that they can pick up on signals, so that they can help us identify what's going on, because we don't speak their language and we try our best, but if we get it wrong, you know, things don't always go well. And so we need not just the people who provide the services, but the people who we go to for help. So medical professionals, counsellors, police, we need them all to start having an autism specialist in their organisation who can help them understand what generally, not the stereotype, but what generally can affect autistic people. Because you can get two autistic people in a room and they'll be completely different. Completely different. What you do to account for one will actually harm the other one. So, you know, whenever you try and organise events for large crowds of autistic people, it is a complete nightmare because our needs are so varied and so dramatically different that we have to start all our meetings by saying, now people, please bear in mind that someone's stimming can be detrimental to someone else, okay? But we are not going to stop anyone from doing the things that they need to do in order to partake in the seminar. At the same time, we ask that no one criticise other people for doing the, it's a real task and a real ask. But at the moment, what we have is a system that isn't hearing us, isn't seeing us, is talking about us in terms of burden to the state, burden to education, the cost of autism. Well, what we need to talk about is the false equivalency, that it's not the cost of autism, it's the cost of not meeting our needs. It's the wasted lives, the empty chair that, you know, that John Adams, it's we can't go on until people actually start to communicate in our language with us. And that's what we need in the services and the health.
Great, thank you. Excellent answers. I've never seen so many questions. I don't know if they were going to get through all of them.
Well,
I
thank
didn't
you
want to
for
warn you about this.
Yeah, you've opened an amazing can of worms, I think. Let me try and pick out a few last ones, and big apologies if we can't get through all of these. Are you all right to carry on just answering a couple more, or are you getting? I mean, it's just fascinating. There's an let me go back to this one here because it's about a bit about later life here. Caroline Lammers mentions working with older adults in a dementia service. Have you got any pointers on how we can assess for potential dementia where a person might have had difficulties all their lives, possibly consistent with autism, maybe diagnosed, maybe not, I guess, you know, that would, because I guess a lot of people, again, at that stage of life don't get a diagnosis or their needs aren't taken into account, even if they have had a diagnosis always, you know, it's a tricky one. So any pointers on that would be useful.
It is a very tricky one. I know a few years ago I was doing talks about autism, and someone said, well, then I'll never see an autistic person because I only work with dementia. And I had to reply back going, well, autistic people can get dementia too, you know. It's difficult. It is really, really difficult. Because there's so many aspects to the autistic presentation as well as to the presentation of dementia, you know, in terms of cognition. And we do need to actually explore that issue in more detail to try and unpick it. But in terms of my advice, with, you know, assessment of dementia and also taking into consideration autism, is if you educate yourself on the presentational aspects of autism, you can feed that into part of the differential thinking that happens when we do any form of assessment. But I'm trying to rack my brain at the minute to think if there's any assessment tool that's actually used in dementia or autism in the older person that would be bridge between the two of them, and I really can't. But I'm intrigued now. I'm going to try and find out if there is one. And if there is, we'll put it on here.
Sorry. What I was thinking is that I don't know of any tools, so I will leave that to you, Gareth. But one thing I find is when I do talks about aging autistics or just people, autistic people aging, one thing that comes up a lot is that the kind of strategies that I say would help us, there's always other people in the room saying, oh, that would be so good for people with dementia too, because there are overlaps. There are clear overlaps with the way it affects our behaviors. Like I was talking about challenging behavior. You know, if you have someone who has dementia and someone who's completely untrained in dementia, I can guarantee you that they'll find that person to have challenging behaviors. Whereas if you actually understand what's going on, you have a lot more patience, you have a lot more awareness, and you're able to actually help the people. So it's not so much finding out the tools to be able to identify the two together, but like I said before, we need it in all settings. The NAS say we're 1% of the population, or 1.1. Amongst the autistic community, because there's so many undiagnosed people who are my age and cannot get diagnosed, we think the figure's a bit higher. We think it's probably about 5% of the population who have some degree of autism and other neurodivergence affecting them, or impacting their social interactions with others. And it's absolutely crucial, because 5% of the population, if we're right, you know, that means every single shop, every single establishment is going to be dealing with autistic people, whether they like it or not. They can either learn to understand the language, or they can do what has been done to us all our lives, which is assume that that person over there is being a bit weird. I mean, before I was talking about behaviors like substance misuse, okay? And I think I mentioned alcohol and cannabis. For me, it's getting that other perspective on things, okay? For me, my bad one was I was a smoker, and I was smoking from the age of 15, and the problem I had trying to give up was not that I was addicted to nicotine. It wasn't that at all. The patches didn't work for me, not because they weren't substituting the nicotine, but because I actually went outside to smoke to get away from people. I went outside to smoke to not have to be surrounded by people. So whenever I was at functions and things, it was even part of my ritual to, when I arrive somewhere, I need to be there so early, because otherwise I get anxious, because anything could go wrong on the journey. I really hate traveling. So it's about having that stim when you get there. If I stood outside a building and smoked one cigarette after the other, no one would report me for anything. Lots of people do that kind of stuff. If I stand outside the building and I'm doing this, which also calms me, and I'm pacing up and down 10 minutes before someone's reporting me for acting strangely. I don't even like going on trains, because there's all those announcements. If you see anyone acting suspicious, and it's almost like I can see all the eyes turning on me, straight away, because I'm there singing to myself or something. So yeah, it's people need to understand our language, because we are everywhere, and we have a right to be everywhere and access things. So I hope that answers a little.
Great, thank you.
With that, in terms of a tool, I've just looked at my Twitter, and Catherine Crumpton, a fantastic researcher in the autism world, has put some stuff up about an autistic satisfaction in holistic care, or care holistic interview schedule, that I'll put a link up when we get this presentation converted for the website as well, to people to actually look at. What I can see, it's quite user friendly, but also quite appropriate to take a look in terms of dementia and just care general. So,
excellent. Yeah, thank you, Gareth. So last couple of questions now. Well, there's an interesting point here from Catherine Vaughan. Says, really interesting presentation. We just wondered whether you're aware of the integrated autism services across Wales. We're specifically set up as an MDT to offer identification of autism for people without intellectual disability. Also post-diagnostic support, and our service model follows a social model of disability, helping to remove barriers to enable people to achieve their potential in life. So the integrated autism service covers Western Bay, so it's Western Bay, so it's MPT, Swansea and Bridgend. As you said earlier, diagnosing lots of women and men in their late 30s and later, so 1.1% stats are probably a gross underestimation. And the final point is, I've lost it now. That I think at some point she invited you to go along and speak to them or get involved in them at some point. So maybe get in touch with Catherine afterwards to possibly go along and get involved. Are you aware of that taking place?
Yeah. Hi, Catherine. Yes, as part of the autism, the Welsh autism strategy, the integrated autism service was embedded in that and rolled out. And again, it's specifically designed to look at and support autistic adults, and they offer a number of services across the board. And it is important to highlight that service is available for everybody, but it's also a good resource. There's a number of people in those services across Wales actually that have a level of expertise and knowledge and understanding of autism, and they're a really good resource to tap into in terms of professionals needing that that soundboard or to ask particular questions. But yeah, Catherine, love to help, love to get involved, and have a discussion with you. Just drop me a line.
Excellent. Interesting one from Julian Morgan. I wonder whether Julian wanted to speak on this himself, if he's able to unmute himself. Working on the NHSE consultation group for learning disability and autism, wants to mention the training and the differences between the people on there. Are you able to unmute yourself and talk, Julian?
That's really important to highlight.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Thanks, Julian. Yes, yeah, great.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much,
Hi, Julian.
Monique. It's been quite interesting to listen to. This comes initially from the question you received first, which was regarding including autism training with learning disability training. Now, on the NHS England Learning Disability and Autism group on which I sit, we have parents, carers, and adults from both groups, and some of those who sit in both camps. So firstly, I'd like to back up the bit you were saying about finding the part where we all seem to have the same goals. I find the fact of putting everybody together in the same room and actually talking about things is extremely efficient, and very quickly they find that they actually do want the same thing, just coming at it from different ways.
Yep.
The NHS is good at that, but unfortunately I would agree with Monique, in local government that's not actually the way they do it. So hence they're a little disconnected on that. But the one thing I wanted to address was bringing up training has been quite a subject brought to the consultation group by us over the past couple of years. As a result of this, we've got the language on the NHS website changed. If you look at it now where it says under autism, it's a lot less medical than it used to be, and it's a lot friendlier. So we're very pleased with that. But the main thing is we've got a commitment here from the NHS, which they've actually sent down through from on high, because we have the buy-in from the Director of Learning Disability and Autism Services, the NHS England Director. And basically it is because one of the things we found was where people were being treated by the same services as learning disabled when they were autistic and were not learning disabled, they were often treated as learning disabled. Not necessarily out of any disrespect, but because the training that is given currently, or up to this point, shall we say, has concentrated mostly on the learning disability side of things. Autism is mentioned fairly much as a bit of a side note. But what has happened now is that the call has gone down that frontline NHS services, particularly those in mental health, those dealing and the doctor's surgeries, in particular, this has been noted to the CCGs, is that the NHS would now prefer if lived experienced adults were the ones giving the autism training to these frontline people. As the NHS is, yes, it takes a little time to filter down in some places, but that is part of their policy now, and that is going forward. And on the subject of ageing, we do keep mentioning that us old farts haven't got forever, and we really would like to talk about this before we retire. Yeah. So that is on their radar, and well, so it usually gets pushed out. But I would like to say that the Learning Disability and Autism Engagement Group at NHS England, based up in Leeds, is actually really good.
Fantastic.
When they say co-production, they mean it. Which
yep. It is a really good example of that cohesive partnership, working, doing it in an innovative and creative way. There's a lot of really good practice that emanates out of Leeds that can be helpful across the UK. But yeah, I in terms of your point about training, I would so heartedly support the fact that autism training has to be autistic led, or at least in partnership across the board. I certainly know that in everything that I do in regards to autism, I always make sure that I'm not the only speaker. There's always an autistic person speaking with me, because I am just one perspective. I'm a parent of an autistic young person, so I can only give it from my life experience and all that sort of stuff, and from the knowledge that I get from reading certain stuff. And I think partnership is key to that level of training. And there's a number of really good examples of training across the UK, and across various different universities too. But yeah, that Learning Disability and Autism National Health Service Group is a really good example of how, by coming together in mutual respect, with a specific goal in mind can actually lead to quite significant and meaningful change.
Yeah.
You know, just like the change of language that's happened in the National Health Service with regards to the work that you and your group are doing. So thank you on behalf of the community.
Yes, thank you, Julian. I completely agree. I think that the work you're doing is absolutely astounding. I'm really glad that you've managed to change some of the language. I think there's still a lot of issues that, you know, we need to work a lot more and a lot deeper into, but, you know, you guys are doing a fab job. So thank you very much.
Right, there I am. I've had to move to sit on the floor now. My battery's run out. This has gone on for so long, but it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. I haven't been able to answer all the many questions that have come in. You've obviously, you know, resonated with a lot of work people are doing, either whether they're in practice doing this, doing research, or whether they're you know, no autistic people, whether they are autistic people. You know, I think this absolutely has been brilliant. Gareth, Monique, I can't thank you enough for a brilliant presentation. It's been absolutely fascinating, and you know, from CADA's point of view, it would be great to carry on the conversation and to help you support you in your endeavors to make a difference, particularly, you know, with autism throughout into later life, and how we've got to make things better for, you know, what is you know, actually a completely normal way of life for people. Yeah. And we've got to just make it so that, you know, we celebrate this neurodiversity, rather than just trying to get everybody to behave as if normal, which probably most people aren't anywhere near like anyway. So yeah, no, really lovely, and a great presentation with a lot of really interesting facts and figures, but also with that lived experience and the social side of autism within there as well. So thank you very much, and thanks to the attendees for some brilliant questions. We'll send out the presentation, and we'll try and get an audio and visual of this as well put up onto the website if it's worked well. So, you know, just big thanks again, and you know, hopefully people will want to join us for some more CADA seminars in the future. I look forward to working with you both, Gareth and Monique, some way or another, supporting your work moving forwards. And please fill in any feedback and evaluation forms that we're able to send to the group as a whole. But other than that, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for everyone for taking part, and thank you for all the questions. If you have any other questions we haven't had time to answer, feel free to email or to post me if you're on social media. Just Google. My Twitter stuff is like @Gareth J Gareth Noble. I'll try and answer and reply back to as many questions as possible, or you can email me on j.g.noble@swansea.ac.uk.
Great.
And if I can't answer, I certainly know someone.
If you want me to answer any questions, message them to Gareth as well, and he'll get them to me. I'm not spelling out my email address over this. But thank you very much, people.
Hi, boss. It's Rhian. I just want to say that I can pull off a log. I think we can pull off a log of all the questions that we've received. So I'll email them to you now within the next couple of days. So I just want to reiterate, thank you so much. It was really, really interesting, and we've loved having you part of our seminar series. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Be kind.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye. 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 Bye.